Let us deal with Gibbon. Before I begin, jump on to Gibbon, discussing Gibbon, I would like to say that, from the last gentleman we discussed, we have traced the rise of modern historiography. Now, with Gibbon, we are graduating into a phase where there will be studies of, comparative cultures. So, inter-civilizational things. Bernier I referred to earlier, and Jean Chardin also I referred to. Both of them are, making comparison between Iran and Indian civilization respectively, and they are trying to tell you that look here in India, for example, Francois Bernier, when he comes and he is writing letters to Gazenti, he is saying that these people don't know, they are not familiar with the circulation of blood theory, which was discovered by Harvey much earlier. But he was appointed by Danishmand Khan, a noble of Mughal emperor, and in his court, Danishmand Khan's court, he called the Hakims, the native, physicians, and told them that, so the native Hakims, they told that, no, we don't believe that. So he sacrificed a goat and let them see that how the blood is flowing. If it is not, had it been static, it would not have been flowing. But this kind of comparison are always going on between the East and the West. Sometimes he praises also, like, shawl weaving. When he watches shawl weaving in Kashmir, he says that, they are very dexterous people, skilled people. These kind of comparative studies will be done, and Gibbon will be the culmination of that. I will later on tell you, Gibbon is writing, the title of his book is Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. But when you enter into those 6 volumes, you will find that that was his starting point, but he is not stopping at that. He is making survey of many civilizations. So I will unfold that story later on. So Edward Gibbon, 1737-94, was a British historian. He was born in England and was a younger contemporary of Voltaire. So around the same time, he was a product of not only British tradition, but also the French tradition. And here again, I would like to say that, this was the period, especially the 18th century is a period when you will find these scholars are frequently, they are not confined to England or France alone. They will be frequently visiting each other's place. For example, Adam Smith, he spent, long time in France, very long time, tried to understand their economy, and he interacted with French scholars and others, and then developed his ideas about, wealth of nations. So this kind of thing is coming because of this interaction, and I won't say interdisciplinary, I would say transdisciplinary approach towards various subjects and, and the intellectuals. So this gentleman is, basing himself on both the traditions. He was not a Democrat, but a great opportunist rather than even Voltaire. When offered a sinecure, he wrote a pamphlet denouncing the American colonists. Like Burke, he was a critic of French Revolution also. He is known for his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, this 6-volume classic. It is regularly, the success of this book is, I consider the success of this book lies in the fact that it is still being regularly published. Now compare them with our, books of our age, you hardly find 1 or 2 editions. And this book is from, when it was published, since then, I don't know how many hundreds of editions have come without a single change. That is important. So it is a history of the Roman and Byzantine Empire. As I said, he is not dealing with Roman Empire alone, which he considers to be a continuation of the Roman Empire from the time of Constantine. I have written it wrongly here, 2nd century, he is 3rd, 4th century, till the fall of the Constantinople in 1453. So he is covering such a large, more than a millennium. Essentially, he wrote a political history with heavy emphasis on individuals in high positions and their actions, although its administrative history is neglected. That is a lacuna. Yet, it is a major work which exercised great influence on modern historiography. His major achievements are, I have enumerated them. So, he assembled almost all the available historical material that had been compiled on the Roman Empire. His sources of study are therefore very, very exhaustive. Not a common, not a human feat, I would say. His choice leads him to include certain important features of West Asian history. As I was saying in the beginning, he is dealing with Islam, he is dealing with rise of Mongols, he is dealing with Caliphate. Thus, he has a very large canvas, wide spectrum. Yet none of them then known major sources are neglected. That is very important. For writing on Islam, he is consulting all sources. For writing on Mongols, he is consulting all sources. So, he is in fact emphasizing the importance of the data, empirical data. And this, you saw Bacon, Descartes, all were emphasizing this. So, he is not deviating from that. His history is written in a concise and incisive form, very incisive, though not necessarily in an abridged form. For certain events which he considered to be important are treated with meticulous methodical details. Though he is erudite, he is not pragmatic. He tests his sources, puts them to canons of criticism, that is skepticism. He, for example, doubts the authenticity of the belief that Arabs destroyed the library of Alexandria in Egypt. That was a misgiving. People used to believe, and it was a general belief among the people, that the huge library of Alexandria was burned by these Arabs. He found that when he checked the facts, he looked at the data, he found that no, this is enormously wrong, absolutely wrong. So, such like Lorenzo Valla's feat, he is also discussing something which had a long past history of unfounded but untested truth, that Alexandria library was destroyed by the Arabs. He discounted that. He demolished that theory by checking the facts. There is a very rational and critical approach to evidence, an attempt on working out larger consequences of particular actions. History deals with causes and consequences, so he goes into that paradigm. Condemning Justinian's suppression of the school at Athens, he says, it resulted in their fleeing to Persia, where they contributed to the dissemination of Greek learning, so that when Arabs conquered Iran, they naturally got in touch with Greek wisdom. And then Arabs translated it, and it took a full circle. When you will find that after 1453, these scholars will be migrating back to Italy. Rise of Florence, we have already discussed that. So, it is Gibbon's effort, he has brought this to the light. Now, it is very easy to say that Renaissance was much to the Arabs, not to the Arab sciences, but to the Greek sciences, Greek knowledge system. There is a total reliance on reason as he sees it, and a consequent condemnation of religion as being irrational and as carrying a degenerating influence. I am not saying this. This is the, well-argued argument of Gibbon. Gibbon, in his analysis of the rise of Christianity, nowhere accepts it as having spread because of its, basic truthiness. This is his, these are his words. There is therefore no concession to theological justifications behind any development of civilization. He regarded Christianity carrying a degrading or degenerating influence on the Roman Empire, like our Renaissance thinkers. For in his view, as the Roman Empire became Christian, it degenerated and declined. His observations on Asian history are quite fair and impartial. His account of the Muslims neither seeks to glorify them nor appear in any respect impressed by the contemporary prejudices against Islam. Arabs come alive in his pages as real men. He is also fairly accurate in his observations on Arab history. You can check that. You will find he is 100% accurate. He seeks to look at history as continuously developing, progressing and improving. History, according to him, shows how man has progressed in material life and also perhaps in virtue. This view is not essentially contradicted by his impressions of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD as being the most stable and prosperous, followed by a period conventionally known as the Dark Ages, once the German tribes started coming and overwhelming and leading to the foundation of the Roman Empire. This period he makes clear was a temporary setback, after which humanity was restored to the path of progress, of course, after the Renaissance. This was the state of modern historiography when French Revolution broke out. He is writing in 1770s. The age of enlightenment coinciding with, now being replaced by the age of revolution. The basic influence of the revolution was not immediately perceptible, but was very important in the long run. Unlike, the Civil War in England, Civil War underlined I have deliberately done because no blood was shed. Unlike the Civil War in England, it was not simply a political attempt for laying foundations of a republic, but was a showdown effort to change institutions, especially, the institutions in France, especially property relations, feudal conventions, ownership of land, and, and things like this. And it was because of this that it was severely criticized in England, because in England, the landlords were dominating. The monarchy and a landlord, they had entered into some kind of a, unwritten alliance. There was an alliance of the interest. So I don't know, but they might have felt that if the same thing is repeated in England, then it will have devastating consequences for them. That is why they are critical. Edmund Burke and others immediately perceived it not as a simple political change, but rightly a social upheaval, which means thus their apprehensions towards it was clearly and deeply founded. Since the French Revolution could not be understood simply as a political revolution and had to be judged by what it performed in the realm of society and economy, total transformation, then the history of the revolution had to be studied by extending its scope from simple political narrations to include aspects of social and economic history. Feudalism got slapped by this revolution. It was not abolished, but it was certainly curtailed and contained, I would say. Thus, the event by its very logic extended the meaning and scope of history. In the beginning, I had told you, with the passage of time, with the lengthening of the experience of the historians, history keeps on expanding. Our perception of history keeps on expanding with the rising sensibilities. In the 18th century, nobody was bothered about environmental history. Nobody was bothered about history of science, history of medicine and other things. Now that has become our primary concern because we are facing those crises everyday life. Therefore, history has now of necessity to be considered as a total history, that is to say an integrationist discipline which integrates all disciplines. That's why I said transdisciplinary approach, integrating all aspects of human life. It initiated in the beginning two major schools of history, Jacobin school which supported the revolution and the anti-Jacobin school which condemned it. They were the revisionists. When we begin to consider the events of the 19th century, the historiography of that period in the background of French Revolution ought to be given due consideration. Then comes Emmanuel Kant, 1724 to 1804. To understand Hegel, one has to go back in time to an earlier philosopher, Emmanuel Kant. because without dealing with Kant, we can't understand Hegel and Marx. So, Kant lived in a small Prussian town in Germany. Now, from France, we moved to England, and from England, we are moving to Germany. As I said in the beginning, that we are taking representative cases. We are not going into the nitty-gritty details of every country and every philosopher. We are taking the broader aspects of major philosophers. So, he was well read, although not very erudite, in his critique of pure reason and critique of practical reason. These two are classics. One must read these two books. He argued that there can be no such thing as pure reason, because reason proceeds, according to him, without exceptions on certain assumptions. So, if you are assuming, then where is the reason? What it actually does is to elaborate these assumptions logically and coherently. In other words, reason is nothing but the application of logic to a set of assumptions. Rationalists would argue that reason is based on observation and experience, but even this assertion, according to Kant, is false. Why? Because our perception about the material world is in itself based on certain assumptions. We carry with us certain ideas which determine our perception of the material world. So, Kant, brought forth the relationship between idea and matter. These two concepts are very crucial. I remember once somebody asked Bertrand Russell, what is your idea about matter? He said, idea doesn't matter to me, and for matter, I don't have any idea. Jokingly, he was setting it aside. But the relationship between idea and matter is emphasized by Kant, which would subsequently be elaborated and refined by Hegel. Kant also argued that there are a number of assumptions one makes in reason which have no basis in material environment, such as morality and ethics. No base in there. Therefore, the source of perception, what is the source of perception? According to him, the practical reason. That is why he is titling his second book as Critique of Practical Reason. That is based on human feelings that have origins outside the human subject matter. It is these feelings that distinguish man from animal. Kant did not, quite answer the question from where did these feelings come from, but just came to accepting them to be emanating from God. Not only in Hegel's concept of idea, but also in his assigning it a predominant role. Idea, he is also assigning predominant role in relation to matter. One can quite clearly notice the influence of Kant running through these philosophers. So, now we will take up Hegel, George Wilhelm Hegel. His full name was George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He was born on 27th August 1770 and died on 14th November 1831. Today is 17th November. He was a German philosopher of the first half of the 19th century and was appointed as professor at Jena University, and after 1818 till his death in 1831, he served as professor at the Berlin University. Unlike Kant, he was an erudite scholar. Essentially, he proceeded with a critique of Kant. He accepted Kant's views, certain views on, the difficulty or even impossibility of constructing pure reason. On that, there is some agreement. Like Kant, he is also not a materialist, but where he differs from Kant is in his treatment of morality as static, stationary and complete. The understanding of morality as a set of principles which when Kant grasped totally but only in segments. Hegel applied the dialectical method to the concepts of idea and matter, whereby an argument once propounded becomes a thesis and its reply becomes antithesis, and the contradiction between the two would lead to their synthesis. All things, matter and idea alike follow the same method. His philosophy of history can be treated at two planes. First, related to his philosophy of dialectics. Here I would like to mention that this is the philosophy of dialectics which Marx would be elaborating later on. In fact, it will be pertinent to say here that Hegel will have a continuous influence on subsequent philosophers, and that we shall be dealing with. While we shall be dealing with others, I will let you know that look here, this is the impact of Hegel. So, second is related to the question of history. Questions such as the rise of nation states, Napoleonic wars, the answers of which led him to formulate the theory of dialectics. Essentially, he considers human action or social phenomenon to reflect a dialectical change, a change that is caused by contradictions between the opposites. In his philosophy, this contradiction is essentially between idea and matter. Idea is a set of perfect ideas to which human ideas aims at approximating, but then there are material forces which influence human ideas and create contradictions. This is his basic philosophy. Material conditions, therefore, according to him, cannot be ignored in the development of society. It would be wrong, therefore, to criticize Hegel, as has often been done, for ignoring the hardcore realities of human existence. While Kant had talked of being, Hegel propounded the concept of non-being as its antithesis. Thesis, antithesis, then synthesis, and becoming as synthesis. In other words, change, even the being as conceived today, is imperfect and is always becoming. It's a continuous process, always transforming itself into higher and improved form. This change is perpetual and incessant because synthesis, as soon as it is achieved, becomes a thesis. Again, there will be an antithesis, thereby initiating the vicious circle of dialectics all over again. No state of idea or matter is thus complete or perfect, but is always subjected to higher forms. In other words, both idea and matter move through contradictions. So, this contradiction plays a very important role. In the material world, nature, far from being static, reflects change. He therefore gave a theory which would later be triumphantly proved by Darwin's theory of challenge and response, which Toynbee will also deal with. Nature is not only not static, but is constantly developing, being in a perpetual state of becoming. If there is a development in nature, there has to be a development in mankind too. Ideas in mankind develop accordingly, therefore. He believed, conforming to Kant, that ideas in human mind cannot be explained by matter, though he admitted that matter certainly influenced the ideas. The source of human ideas, according to Kant, was the idea. This idea is not to be confused with God, nor it is a concept of perfect or total morality, but an ethics that keeps on developing through a process of dialectics, reaching higher and higher levels with each vicious circle of thesis, antithesis and synthesis taking around. So, these ideas are subjected by matter and determine human perception of matter. Thus, mankind is not determined by matter, but is the idea that determine matter. Hegel's lectures on history, though not important for their factual details, but are of vital importance in understanding his perception of historical change. Just as nature develops, so does mankind. These are his views. So does mankind, and so does his institutions, which he has created. Though an idealist, Hegel gives due consideration to matter and argues that the highest institution that has been developed by mankind so far is the institution of private property. Because it recognizes the separate entity of an individual and his right to own wealth and property. It is the concept of private property, he says, that distinguishes man from animal Animal doesn't have a private property, but they do mark certain territory as their own, but there is no ownership. In stating this, Hegel was not particularly original, for as early as 1660s, Bernier had believed that Western European civilization was superior to that of Asia because while the former protected private property, the latter did not. India was one of them. Hegel argued, obviously, quite erroneously, that private property did not develop in China because the society was essentially egalitarian. It did not develop in India because of the institution of caste system. While recognizing human differentiation tended to freeze these differences, caste system. To substantiate his argument, he quoted a passage from Fifth Report of the Parliamentary Committee of 1812 on the nature of village community in India. Private property, he argued, could develop in European societies largely because of the assertion of the human freedom brought by the Reformation movement. So, in England, it could be. Since private property, according to him, was the highest possible institution which was created by man, to which mankind has arrived at so far, reflecting individual freedom and rights, Hegel was called upon to answer the question of who protects the private property, or instead who can protect it best. Unlike Adam Smith and Kant, who considered state to be a factor behind restraining growth and saw it as a necessary evil, Hegel attached considerable significance to state. State was not only inevitable, but is something to be positively desired, for it presented a synthesis between individual freedom and human interdependence. Put in a dialectical formula, individual freedom is a thesis, human interdependence is antithesis, and state, the ultimate, is the synthesis. For it unites, correlates, and reconciles these two elements, which then function under the aegis of the state. He also argued, to the admiration of the Prussian despots, that monarchical state was the highest form of state, one that is most suitable, a view quite contrary to what the French revolutionaries had thought and proclaimed by the liberals and republicans. He defended monarchy for two basic reasons. Private property, according to him, is preserved best when it is inherited. So, law of inheritance, only private property can be inherited. And a monarch can afford to overlook his immediate interest in favor of long-term interests. Not only did Hegel defend monarchy, but also seems to defend church and its clergy. Religion, he says, should be perceived as a synthesis between the natural to the supernatural. Primitive religions saw the supernatural as a reflection of the natural, and because of this simple relationship, there was little morality in primitive religions. Christianity to him seemed closest to his idea within quote, because it has wider meanings and nuances. For in the Christian concept of Christ as Son of God, when you accept the God as Son of God, then he saw an interrelationship between idea and matter. His philosophy was therefore more acceptable to the church establishments than Kantian philosophy. So, Hegel in his time became a seer, a sage, sage-like, Later, his philosophy was used by the Nazis to argue in favor of their theory of German superiority. Though Hegel was by no means an admirer of such a Germany, but just came doing so in appreciating private property, Protestantism, and monarchy. To conclude, the basic contributions of Hegel can be summarized as follows. Belief in change is a continuous process in history. Belief in the interaction between idea and matter. This interaction between idea and matter proceeds through contradictions. The synthesis of these contradictions leads to evolution to growth. Whom I also consider very important for his contribution to the philosophy of change is Ludwig Andreas Feuerbach, 1775-1833. He was a disciple of Hegel and a teacher of Marx. So, he was a chain between the two. Hegel and Marx. He wrote a book called The Essence of Christianity. History, he argued, could be seen as one single process. Man abstracts more and more from God and attributes it to himself, like shrinking of the realm of supernatural, extension of the realm of human powers. There was therefore no positive role for religion in the historical process, where he is very close to Hegel. It was only a part of constricting or declining realm of the supernatural. So, this Feuerbach and following him several others accepted the Hegelian method, but rejected his concept of idea as also his historical derivations.